Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the community meeting for the Cameron Peak Fire. I'm David Boyd. I'm one of the public affairs, public information officers on the fire. Purpose of the meeting tonight is to give you an overview of what happened today. Very similar lineup to what we had at the last meeting. So we'll start with Aviva Braun, our meteorologist. Move to our operations section chief, Paul DeMerico. Sheriff Smith is here, and then we'll hear from our IC, Dan Dallas, and then we'll answer some questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aviva. And we do have a mic tonight, so bear with us while we swap, but it should help with the sound.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Aviva Braun. I'm an incident meteorologist serving with the Rocky Mountain Team 1. My normal job, my day job, is a meteorologist with the National Weather Service based out of the Cheyenne, Wyoming office. Just a quick overview of what has led to where we are today. We have had a very long dry season with not a lot of precipitation. Excellent hiking days, but not a lot of precipitation. And then it's been accented by extreme drought, and that's what we're stuck in right now. Then on top of that, we have had a number of wind events, first Tuesday night into Wednesday, and then today into tomorrow. I do have a red flag warning that I issued for the fire. I put it out for 1100 this morning, and I have it going overnight into tomorrow to 2000. So with that in mind, let me tell you why I have that red flag. And actually, we actually also have issued by the National Weather Service in Boulder, we actually have a high wind warning for elevations over 9,000 feet tonight between midnight and 9 a.m. for the very strong winds that we're expecting tonight. So today, we've had strong west and southwest winds that were consistently 20 to 30 miles per hour with gusts up to 40 and 50 miles per hour. That was on the west side of our fire. We also had very low humidities on that side of the fire. We dropped into the teens on that side. On the east side, where the fire is currently growing, we started off out of the southeast, 5 to 10 miles per hour with gusts of 15. But then, as the pressure built up, as things changed, our winds changed to the west-northwest, and our winds increased, and our humidities dropped significantly down to 30. Let me tell you why we switched over from that southeast winds to west winds. We had what's called a thermal low, a heat low that formed over the plains, over the Front Range. That will help bring, we want to Earth always wants to fill the lows. So that's why the west winds eventually came in that direction. Also, we also have a front that's coming in tomorrow, and ahead of it we had a pressure buildup, and that will also accentuate those westerly winds. So eventually we did have westerly winds across the whole entire fire. And what was super interesting today as I was watching the fire, as the fire went down the Miller Fork drainage, we are actually experiencing southwesterly winds, and that drainage picked up on that west component and funneled it right down that area. So think about gap winds. You're trying to push a lot of things through a narrow space, and that's exactly what was happening in that drainage. We are trying to push a lot through that narrow space, and it accelerated, pulling the fire with it. That's what we had today. Going into tonight, ahead of this front that's coming in tomorrow, and with that increased pressure, we're having pressure build up from west to east behind the Medicine Bow Mountain Range. And as that pressure builds up, the winds will stay elevated through that period. And think of that as a rock in a stream. So there's going to be a lot of water that's going to build up against that rock, and then eventually it's going to want to spill over it. That's kind of what a mountain wave event is. So that's what we're going to have tonight, and it's going to start from west to east. So we're expecting the increased winds. First off, we're going to be elevated the entire time, gusts 50 to 60 through the evening into this event. But starting at 0400 through 0800, so 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., we're expecting winds across the west with that mountain wave breaking up to 75 miles per hour. On the east side, it's going to take time for it to get here. It'll flow through the east side between 6 and 9 a.m. And we're going to have gusts 60 to 70, just a little bit lower. But the important thing is, and what I've learned by serving on this fire, is that at some point, it doesn't matter how strong the winds are. Once you get above 50, it's really strong, and it's going to carry the fire no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's 50 or 70, it's still strong. So that's what's going to happen overnight with this mountain wave event. This is where it gets complicated. That front that I previously mentioned will start coming in through the area, and as it comes in, I expect that to be sometime in the early afternoon, by mid-afternoon at the latest. That front's going to drop in from the northwest, and all of our winds are going to turn from westerly to northwesterly. That will not only change the direction, but then that's also when we're going to start decreasing our winds just slightly. And remember, we'll still be above 50, so it doesn't really matter in the big picture. But we'll start seeing that happen, and eventually that front will move on through, and the winds will taper off slowly. On the other side, as that front moves through from the northwest, we'll have a front moving in from the northeast. That front is going to move in from the northeast and then nestle up against the foothills. We had that occur on Wednesday, and that's what helped stop the fire where it is along County Road 27. We're expecting something similar over that night, over Wednesday night. It actually came up into the fire. That's what I'm hoping for this time. It's just really hard to tell how strong that will be relative to what the prevailing winds are doing, that northwesterly flow. So at some point, that line that comes in from the northeast and nestles up against the foothills will help the situation and bring winds that will combat the overall flow and kind of slow it down as a block, but also bring higher humidities, which will help as well. So these are the conditions that our firefighters are contending with. These are the conditions that they're battling against. These are very difficult and dangerous situations for them to be in. And so just keep that in mind. This wind event, on top of the extreme drought that we've been having, has set them up for a very difficult firefight. And I'll hang around for questions if you have any. Thank you.
So Paul DeMerico, Operations Section Chief for the Cameron Peak Fire. I'm going to start with the good. From this point here, all the way around the horn to the Buckhorn 44H Road was looking really good today. We had resources in there patrolling and mopping up. We also had a contingent of resources on Highway 14, patrolling that corridor, putting out hot spots, and also mitigating any hazards that may exist, so we can hopefully repopulate that area in the near future. Moving down, as most folks most likely saw today, we had quite a bit of activity, and that very challenging day in Branch 2 for our firefighters today. A lot of it's due to the weather conditions and the fuel conditions. Aviva hit the nail on the head. These are unprecedented conditions with our fuel moistures and the weather that we're seeing, and it's been a heck of a tough fight for our firefighters out there today. But let me tell you what we're trying to do with the activity that we've had. We were successful today in keeping the fire south of the 44H Buckhorn Road. There was a slop that occurred on Wednesday, but we've been able to limit that growth by actively engaging that with direct line using hand crews and heavy equipment. And so for the most part, we've been successful, and our objective there is to keep the fire spreading up to the north and impacting any of those communities that exist. We also assess some of these structure protection needs in these communities around Stove. Excuse me, I apologize. Yeah, Stove Prairie. That's what I meant to say. I was thinking Prairie Park and Stove Prairie. In those communities, we had heavy equipment and hand crews in there today, looking at those areas, just ensuring that if something were to get north of the Buckhorn Road, that we had a plan in place. We did have resources spread out on the County Road 27 down to Highway 34, looking at those structure protection needs, and also putting in indirect lines for fire deflection around some of the structures on County Road 27. Going down into Branch 3, a lot of that focus down here on the southern end was in the communities of the Retreat, Cedar Park, and Storm Mountain. We had a large contingent of wildland fire engines, surge structure type 1 engines, and ground wildland fire crews in there doing structure protection and mitigation, but also making sure that we had a good plan in place for if and when the fire were to hit those communities. We do know that the fire got fairly active, and we talk often about firefighter or public and firefighter safety is our #1 priority. The fire got fairly active, especially on the upper end of the community of the Retreat today. We did have to pull some of our resources out of this area, but on our way out, we tried to do as much mitigation as possible with those structures in that community. Viva did mention about tomorrow's weather continuing. Tomorrow's going to be a challenging day for us, just as we saw today. And that's going to continue through tomorrow night. I wish I had better news, but that's the reality. We're going to see very much the same tomorrow as we saw today. And moving on over into the park area, not a lot of growth. There is some heat still in there, but not a lot of movement. We did insert another contingent of overhead folks to take a good look at that to ensure that if anything were to pick up in there, that we had adequate resources and whatnot for future operations. I'm going to stick around for questions, and that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Good evening, Sheriff Smith. I want to give you an overview of operations from the Sheriff's Office today as we dealt with damage assessment teams, getting that put together to assess what occurred on Wednesday, and we made some good progress on that today. I don't have specific numbers, but I'll talk about that, a little bit about what we were doing early in the day and what we saw out there. And then as the day wrapped up, as we wore on and we got the winds that pushed down here, what we saw, and then obviously this move forward, other evacuations. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what those were and why we put those in place, what our concerns are overnight, and what the county's plan is and your local fire departments. First of all, the damage assessment teams did get out early today, and they got around the Buckhorn and County Road 27, started getting those teams put back into there to get to the structures that were safe to get to at this point in time. I don't have any numbers to come back with, but I do know they got out there and have that job started, so we're certainly pleased. However, with that said, we knew from those forecasts that by around noon we were going to see winds picking up, and that relatively quiet morning we had was going to shift, and that did occur. I was actually up the Buckhorn throughout the morning as that occurred. I got a chance to put eyes on that, and I know shortly after noon or early afternoon we did pull those damage assessment teams out because it just wasn't safe to be back in there. So we got those things going. As we got into early afternoon, the winds that were described did start that push that started a very aggressive run towards Glen Haven. We've had county fire spotters out there because when it comes to doing evacuations, as I put on social media, I love satellites, I love overflight planes, but there's nothing like somebody on the ground that knows the area to add to it. So we had spotters all around the fire today, and when we saw that picking up, That hit trigger points that before we had already done evacuations, the Glen Haven area, and we really shored that up along with Highway 34, and ended up, because of the fear of how that was running early afternoon, about 2 o'clock, to be honest, we had expectations that fire would very easily be down to 34, impacting folks there. So we started that. We also made the decision down around Carter Lake, really anything from the county the county parks building, everything west back in that Carter Lake area. We did go ahead and do voluntary evacuations. I'm pleased that the fire did not make that run, and I think you heard a pretty good description of how it got pushed. And I was in there as the winds at times actually pulled back up from the south and were pushing back, which was promising. However, we know what's coming tomorrow, actually what's expected to start any time now up there with those winds. So we don't want to get complacent with that area. We also did a lot keeping an eye on Storm Mountain, and I know there were crews up there today throughout the day watching that. I had actually anticipated to see Storm Mountain impacted by now. However, because of that shift in winds, we didn't get that. So we're a little better off than we expected. And then as it came down to 27, we were looking at this area on County Road 27 south of Masonville. We didn't see that jump and run during the day, which we were very pleased to not have, because we didn't know how this fire was coming back out with the west push and how it was going to impact our communities. However, when we got the forecast for these winds that came from our meteorologist, starting any time now and moving throughout the night, we made the difficult decision that we couldn't wait till tomorrow to start looking at what happens on County Road 27. And really, to be blunt with that, we didn't want to be waking people up at 2 or 3 in the morning if that thing got to jumping and running and running them out without any clue this was coming. So we touched on those evacuations as well. So that's basically where we're at so far. What our plans are for the night is that we have crews. They're going to be out here on County Road 27 again, spotting and to watch for lookout to see if things are moving and how that changes any of our evacuations. We'll also have folks continuing in Glen Haven. My plan is to be overnight in Glen Haven with the crew down there, keeping eyes on the fire. And just to give a little situational awareness, prior to coming here, I just came off of Bulwark Ridge back in the retreat, and as the time I left an hour and a half ago, the fire had not gotten into the retreat. I think it was back up on that Miller Fork area a little bit more, but it had not gotten to the retreat. We were seeing some movement to the east, so we continue to watch. We'll keep an eye on Storm Mountain tonight as well. And over on this side, I know during the day we had Loveland crews that were up on Storm Mountain with the crews from the team. Estes and Glen Haven had crews down there as well. And we've made it known to the overhead team that we have high expectations with a very dangerous night. We have high expectations for structure protection throughout the night to assist those local teams, because we're not going to be satisfied to wait till daylight in the middle of a fire to get crews back up in there. So we have made that known. Also have met with the folks in Estes Park. I got out there to the EOC late this afternoon and had conversations with them to let Estes know, because there was concerns earlier if it happened to push back up 43 that we could have a threat to Estes. We don't see that now, but we are very glad to be connected up with Estes Park. With that, I certainly want to add in, if you were in these affected areas or been anywhere nearby, this Colorado community has stepped up for us. We've had State Patrol, we had National Guard early on, had plenty of agencies. Recently, Boulder County has put a huge contingent in to help us with evacuations. We're very appreciative for that. We've had deputies from far away as Jefferson County, Gilpin County up here staffing roadblocks, helping citizens get back in. As much as we can, we are getting people back in, especially in the areas that we had to pull the trigger very fast. So we've worked with that during the day. We don't anticipate being able to do that overnight. I also want to point out that Greeley and Fort Collins PD have given us staff as well. We're up to an unprecedented number of posts out there. Certainly we're keeping an eye on your property if you've been moved out, and we're doing everything we can to help you get back in, to get the critical pieces, what it's safe to do, to get to animals, livestock, etc. So that's where we're at now. I'll be out overnight with my crew, and we'll be reporting in as we can. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Dan Dallas. I'm the incident commander for the Rocky Mountain Incident Management Team. The sheriff kind of stole most of it, and rightly so. But before I do that, Dave Boyd, who introduced the meeting tonight, asked me, he wanted to announce, I don't know if he forgot or didn't say it, but I'll repeat the acreage again. The fires currently at last measurement with the infrared was 173,536 acres, 57% contained. To follow up with the sheriff, I just happened to come from the same place, Wonder. Fire seems to draw everybody, but I myself just went out there to the same place the sheriff was. And so kind of the good news, I'll give good news and some expectations and maybe bad news. I would hope not, but just create some expectations here. What it reminded me of, and as an incident commander, pretty much everywhere I go, I was reminded of the importance of community and the importance of cooperators. All right, Sheriff, there is every color of truck that there's probably in Colorado out there. I saw trucks from nearby, and I saw trucks from far away. I saw the task force from Boulder helping you folks, and it just reminded me how people pull together on these things. And if there was ever a time, that's going on here with this fire. 60 plus days, you folks have just been going at it, but you've had a lot of help, and I know you appreciate it, and so do I. So what I saw up here was the fire going along the ridge. It indeed hadn't got down into the retreat into the main houses down there. But this gets to the expectations part. You've heard the weather, you've heard the difficult conditions that we face, our firefighters are facing, and the police department and the emergency folks that are all working kind of hand in hand out there. You can expect, unless whatever the weather gods just turn everything off, which I don't think is going to happen, because Aviva's been pretty right on, at least in our time here. You can expect some difficult circumstances through the night and then off into the morning. The wind's going to blow. It's going to be another challenging day. Kind of a challenging night probably, and we'll see where we are in the morning. But all said, it's those same things, the community gathering up, the cooperators that are coming to help. That's what gets you through these situations like that. So really appreciate all the help and all the interest. And with that, I'll just go. Dave, do you want to go to the questions?
Yeah, thank you. Mike, thank you, Dan. Okay, our first, we have some questions for the sheriff. And I know you went over this on Wednesday, but if you could go over the process again for the structure assessment, and then how people are notified about when they can come in and that whole process.
Very good. Thank you, David. Yeah, for the damage assessment, it's really kind of a two-step process for us. And I'm glad you brought that question out, because I don't think I've addressed it in detail. The first round for us, once that fire has gone through, is what we like to refer to as a windshield assessment. And that's taking the crews that are out there, that are in the area, and letting them do a drive-through and get a basic size up, what areas were impacted, rough estimate of what the structures are in different areas, so we can have an idea of where to start putting those damage assessment teams. And so the process we have here in Larimer County is the damage assessment experts for us come from the county assessor's office. They better than anybody else know the structures that are up there. They have an idea what's outbuildings, what are actual homes, etc. So we team them up with our fire crews that go out with them. First, we have to, after we assemble that, figure out what areas are best to get into first. So on this fire, we talked about There was a tremendous amount of damage back here on Crystal Mountain. I think everybody knows that, but that's an extremely dangerous area to get into. Still has active fire. It was burned very hard, so there's trees falling everywhere. I don't anticipate being able to get them in there for some time. What we did is we moved out to the front edge, and we worked that in the areas like Stringtown Gulch and Moon Dance and some of those areas. So we got those teams back. They got started, and I think I've explained, at least on other social media, that it's not as simple as going back like in a city and block by block, house by house. When we get back there, it does take some work. Sometimes it takes GPS work. There's oftentimes no signs of what the address is back there. So it takes some GPS work. We also, again, have to really count on the structures that were there, do our best to determine what was a listed home, what might be outbuildings. There's areas back here where we have structures that were never listed on the county's assessment files. They're not considered a legal dwelling, so they're not on the record. So we work to assess those, get our best idea what's in there, and they're going to put those together. When we had the earlier part, when we got down into Monument Gulch, we had an area we knew. Monument Gulch was a little easier because the Homeowners Association was able to help us bring together who those homeowners were. We're still trying to figure out, as we get through all of these areas here with the most recent structure lost, the best way. The assessors will have records of who those individuals are, and my expectation is that we're likely to make phone calls to those individuals. Unlike High Park Fire, where we were all able to come together, obviously because of COVID we can't do that, and we have a massive area, so phone calls will likely be how we take care of those notifications. First priority obviously is going to be people who lost property. It's going to be later that we try to do our best to confirm with other folks what structures are gone. I think once we've made that assessment of who's lost and we've notified them, then more likely we would place that list out so other folks could go down and look at a public list. But the thing we'd like to avoid, if at all possible, is somebody finding out because some organization, some other person read that they lost their property and made the phone call or put it on social media. We want them to know that directly if at all possible. So that's our current plans and process with that, David.
Thank you. Another question is if folks know of people that are in the evacuated areas, what's the best way to, what should they do?
So if you have friends that are evacuated, what I would ask is please don't call in to make those checks. Our folks are really overloaded dealing with those who are in personal need. The areas that are impacted, you can either go to larimer.org, click on the link at the top that has Cameron Peak Fire. It'll bring you through, it'll hook you down to lists of where those evacuations are, which are mandatory, which are voluntary. Or if you want to know where those evacuations occur, you can go to nocoalert.org and sign up, and you can get notifications as well. But if you look at that and you know of your friends, the best way to do is to reach out either directly or, and I can't confirm whether Red Cross is keeping lists or not, but you can certainly call Red Cross, again, through the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, can get you hooked up, and they may be able to help you track folks down as well.
Okay, thank you. And one more, some questions from Estes Park and other areas. If you could just briefly go over kind of how you work with the incident management team on the on the trigger points for pre-evacuation and evacuation.
Very good question. What we've done to coordinate with the town and how those are set up. I'm really blessed to have true experts up in Estes Park between police department with Chief Kufeld and the fire department with Chief Wolf. We've been actually working really for over a month on those because, as the Estes Park folks know, there was a threat early on as the fire hooked around that western side. So they started building those areas of how they would group the evacuations, and trigger points changed because obviously a trigger point earlier came through the park to come over. These trigger points are based more on the fire coming south from Glen Haven and working its way up. So we've worked with them, and we talked to the fire experts that are out there as well, because they have a good idea on fire behavior. So it's bringing a lot of heads together to figure out where those trigger points are. And as I've mentioned before, I've had people ask, can you tell me exactly where it is? Well, we don't have a point we're going to say at this point exactly is when we do these things, because how that fire is moving has an impact on that as well. If a fire is moving very quickly and we have the kind of conditions that are extremely concerning, we would likely pull it a little bit earlier, because we know it's moving faster. If it's moving slower, we have more time to watch what's going to happen, and we also factor in what's occurring with the weather that's coming in the future. So that's how we build these up. You know, that there's never guarantees, but I can tell you, the typical thing that most folks know here is wind in our area does generally come west to east, and rarely is a long sustained push north to south. So with that said, and there's never a promise, but the concerns about that weather pushing this up through Glen Haven, up over and dropping back down into Devil's Gulch really are pretty low. So those concerns are certainly less than the areas coming down through here at this time.
Great, thank you. I think we got them. Questions for you. Thanks. Paul, we got a few operations questions. Can you tell us more? Were we able to get any suppression aircraft up today, and what those were?
So yes, earlier in the day today, we had both rotor wing, which is helicopters with bucket drops, and fixed wing aircraft with retardant, and we were primarily focused on the Buckhorn Road and the bottom and the southern flank of what we're calling the finger off of Division Tango. So we did have them up. So throughout the day, due to the weather, like Aviva had mentioned, there's different weather patterns and wind events, and they're terrain driven. So when the winds picked up initially, we did have to ground our aircraft, but then there were certain points throughout the day we were able to utilize mostly rotor wing helicopters with bucket drops, and we were focused on this area and this area and this area. But for I would say about a third of our shift today we were able to utilize aircraft for the most part. But tomorrow, looking at what's predicted, highly unlikely we'll be flying at all.
Okay, thank you. We're bumping up a little bit past 8, so I got a question for Commander Dan Dallas.
Whoa, careful.
Stay close, Paul. You might be able to help. The question is, I know you were up there and in Glen Haven Retreat area, and so what types of structure protection was being done, and any kind of hose lays or that sort of thing, and
sure.
Why? The question is, it seemed like up north that got done much sooner than it did here.
That's a great question. So, kind of, let me tell it in story fashion. So, on Wednesday, you had this 17-mile run, which created new fire line, which brought it much closer to Glen Haven. And I heard some of this today, and so that's the reason I went up there. I had a good visit with the fire chief up in Glen Haven, and also went out twice actually out into the retreat to see what was going on, because I heard some some complaints and things that they didn't feel like they'd had maybe the same opportunity as some of the folks up north. So a lot of that has to do with timing. You got this big kind of thrust on Wednesday, if you will, opened up a whole bunch of new fire line, brought it close to Glen Haven and the retreat where it is now. And so our response to that was to start moving people and resources, hose lays, pumps, engines, all the things that around to start working on this new thing that appeared, basically come yesterday morning. And so there probably wasn't as much as there was in Red Feather. They, that area up there, CSU, they've been working on that for months, but a lot of it had to do with the timing of this. That's what brought the fire closer. We sat and explained with the chief, walked him through what we had in here for our resources. I know he felt a lot better about it and understood what was going on. So very specifically, when I was out there, the crews had already done a whole lot of mitigation work around the houses. You could see piles where they'd removed wood and all that sort of thing from around the houses. And then the surge resources we had, along with the 6 engines from Glenhaven, were all working around the houses. When I left, they were systematically foaming every house in the retreat with foam that they put into their engines, which is a suppressant, a surfactant, and it suppresses fire and stays a lot longer than just spraying them with water. So they were systematically working their way down in anticipation that there could be a flame front that comes through, but they were foaming every single house on their way down. So that's where, you know, I made mention earlier of all the, it reminded me all the cooperation, all the folks that show up when there's a call put out to come help your neighbor. That's what's going on right there, right now.
Okay, and one more question for you. So as we've seen this, the perimeter increase for the fire, essentially the circumference of the fire increase, the containment number has stayed the same and even bumped up a percentage today. So can you explain how we calculate that?
Yeah. So I heard that too, and actually questioned it myself. If you remember the last our last community meeting, I said I suspect it's going to go down, but as it turns out, it actually stayed the same. It was 56%. Now it's gone up a percentage point. A lot of that has to do with our capability. The fire was growing at the same time as some of the containment up in this area that Operations Paul keeps talking about. So there was a gain in containment at the same time this was going on. Ultimately, we rely on infrared from either the Colorado multi-mission aircraft, or we have a plane that'll fly over at our request. Usually we can get it every kind of second or third night, and then we take that infrared and it goes into GIS, and they literally just go around the perimeter and measure and get the percentage of contained perimeter. And it was on that particular night, even though I thought it was, which was the night before last, I thought it was gonna go down, it actually stayed the same. It was 56%, and then we've gained a percentage today.
Okay. Great, thanks, Dan. And I always like to, the number is important to watch, but I always like to look at the map too. So the black, as I think most people know, is what's contained, and the red is uncontained line. So that's, the percentage is important, but also look at where the lines turn in from red to black, because that'll really help tell the story too. So we have one more question that's for Aviva, and can you briefly explain again when we're going to see these easterly winds come in and compete with the westerly winds, northwesterly winds?
Hi everyone, Aviva Braun. Yeah, that's a really good question because it really does make a difference, at least on the east side of the fire. Expecting it to start coming down across the northeast front range in the early afternoon, but not really making it to the fire line until about 6 p.m. I'm hoping that it'll come a little faster, it'll gain a little momentum, but it will be competing against really strong winds and pressure gradients from the west. At some point it will undercut it, so plus or minus 6 p.m. by an hour or so, and then hopefully it'll undercut it, and then it will bump up and nestle against the foothills. What we saw on Wednesday of this week, feels like it's been an eternity, what we saw is that it slowly made its way up over the course of the night into the fire and actually came up to about 75 to 8,000 feet. So patience, but it will start turning out those winds to the south and east and combat those winds, bringing all the winds down across the fire. Is there any other questions for me?
No, I think
Okay.
appreciate it. Thank you. That concludes the meeting for tonight. We'll continue to monitor Facebook and answer questions. Thanks for attending, and we'll continue to monitor Facebook. Thanks a lot.